Hi, I'm Eliza. They sat me at the kids' table at my own family reunion. 20 years of accomplishments, a billion-dollar company, and 7 humanitarian awards. Yet they still saw me as the little girl they could dismiss. But when my bodyguard leaned down and whispered in my ear, everything changed. The look on their faces when they realized who I'd become? Priceless. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The California sun beat down mercilessly on my Tesla as I pulled into the long driveway of my aunt's estate. The ornate iron gates parted reluctantly, almost as if the property itself was hesitant to welcome me back. My fingers tightened around the steering wheel, knuckles turning white. I hadn't driven myself in years, not with my security team's protocols. But today felt different. Today needed to be personal. "Are you sure about this, Miss Reynolds?" Marcus's voice crackled through my earpiece. I adjusted the rearview mirror, catching a glimpse of the black SUV following at a discreet distance. 3 years as my head of security, and Marcus still couldn't bring himself to call me Eliza. "I'm sure," I replied, my voice steadier than I felt. "Stay back until I signal. This is something I need to do alone first." The sprawling Mediterranean-style mansion loomed ahead, its cream-colored walls and terracotta roof tiles gleaming under the afternoon sun. Aunt Vivian's pride and joy, bought with the fortune Uncle Richard had amassed in real estate. The place where my extended family gathered every summer, a tradition that had continued without me for the past 8 years. Until today. The invitation had arrived 3 weeks ago, not addressed to me directly, but forwarded by my mother's assistant with a hastily scribbled note. "Vivian says you should come this year. Might be good PR for the family. Not, 'we miss you,' or 'it's time to reconcile.' Just good PR." I parked behind a row of luxury vehicles. Mercedes, Lexus, the occasional BMW, modest compared to what I was used to seeing in my company parking lot. For a moment I sat motionless, staring at the mansion through my windshield. The same windows where Cousin Sophia had once pressed her face against the glass, mocking me as I left in tears at 17. The same entrance where Uncle Richard had loudly questioned whether my scholarship to MIT was charity for the poor branch of the family. The same porch where my father had stood, silent and stoic as I drove away for the last time. My phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. "Standing by." I took a deep breath, grabbed my Hermes bag, an unnecessary shield but armor nonetheless, and stepped out of the car. The click of my Louboutins against the cobblestone path felt like a countdown. 5 steps, 4, 3, 2. The massive oak door swung open before I could knock. "Eliza, you actually came!" My cousin Sophia's voice was honeyed with fake enthusiasm, her eyes darting past me to my car, then to the security SUV waiting at the edge of the driveway. "We were starting to think you'd send a cardboard cutout or something." Her laugh grated, against my ears like sandpaper. "Hello, Sophia." I leaned in for the obligatory air kiss. "It's been a while." 8 years, but who's counting?" She stepped aside, waving me in. "Everyone's out back. You remember the way, right? Or should I have one of the staff guide you?" "I remember," I said, stepping into the cool marble foyer. Family photos lined the walls. Graduations, weddings, vacations, chronologically arranged from oldest to newest. I paused at the gap where my MIT graduation should have been. In its place hung a photo of Sophia's second child's baptism. The sound of laughter and clinking glasses drifted in from the back patio. I steeled myself, adjusting the lapel of my cream Chanel jacket. 8 years. 8 years since I'd seen most of them. 8 years since I'd walked away from the family that never believed in me or my ridiculous startup idea. 8 years since they'd mattered in my life. I made my way through the house, past the living room where Uncle Richard had once told me that women in tech are just glorified secretaries, past the kitchen where Aunt Vivian had suggested I find a nice man to support your little hobby before it's too late. Each room held memories I'd spent years in therapy unpacking. The glass doors to the back patio slid open silently. No one noticed me at first. 30 or so relatives scattered across the expansive patio and lawn, drinking, laughing, playing, the roles they'd perfected over decades of family dynamics. Uncle Richard holding court by the grill, Aunt Vivian arranging flowers with military precision. My cousins clustered by the pool, martini glasses in hand, designer sunglasses perched on their perfectly highlighted hair. And then there was my mother, Catherine, sitting primly on a chaise lounge, nodding along to whatever Aunt Vivian was saying. The mother who had chosen peace in the family over defending her own daughter. The woman who had said, "Maybe they're right, Eliza. Maybe you should consider something more suitable." Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Someone noticed me finally, my younger cousin Ryan, now in his 20s, staring with open-mouthed surprise. Like dominoes, heads began to turn. Conversations halted mid-sentence. Even the ambient music seemed to dim. 8 seconds of complete silence. I counted each one. Then the performance began. "Eliza!" Aunt Vivian's voice carried across the patio, too loud, too enthusiastic. "You're here! Richard, look who decided to grace us with her presence." She approached with arms outstretched, a perfect picture of familial welcome. I accepted her embrace, noting how she kept her body angled slightly away from mine, careful not to wrinkle her St. John knit dress. "We're so glad you could make time in your busy schedule," she said, emphasis on busy, carrying all the weight of her judgment. "It's been far too long." "Has it?" I smiled, maintaining eye contact until she looked away first. Small victories. Uncle Richard approached, tumbler of scotch in hand. Well, the prodigal returns." He didn't offer a hug, just a curt nod. "Saw you in Forbes last month, quite the spread." "Thank you," I said. The photographer insisted on the helicopter shot of the campus. I thought it was a bit much, but apparently it tested well with readers. His jaw tightened. My campus. My 20-acre corporate headquarters in Silicon Valley, designed by the same architect who had refused to take his call for his office building 2 years ago. My mother finally approached, her smile tight. "Eliza, I wasn't sure you'd come." She brushed her lips against my cheek, the familiar scent of Chanel No. 5 bringing an unexpected lump to my throat. "You look professional. Not beautiful, not well. Professional. The closest thing to a compliment she could manage." "Thank you, Mother. You look well." The initial greetings gave way to a strange choreography of awkward small talk and carefully crafted questions. How was business? Had I seen the troubling article about tech regulation in the Times? Was I dating anyone serious? Each question less about genuine interest and more about probing for weakness, for confirmation that I would eventually fail as they had always predicted. I answered each one with practiced ease, the same poise I used in hostile investor meetings or difficult press conferences. Yes, the company was expanding into Asia. No, the regulatory concerns weren't affecting our specific sector. Yes, I was seeing someone, but it wasn't serious enough to discuss. Small lies to deflect deeper invasions. As the initial curiosity about my arrival faded, the family began to drift back to their conversations, to the comfort of excluding me without seeming to exclude me. I found myself standing alone by the bar, watching as everyone returned to their familiar orbits, groups that had solidified in my absence. "Dinner in 20 minutes, Aunt Vivian announced, clapping her hands like we were children at summer camp. "Everyone please start making your way to the tables." Tables. Plural. I followed the crowd through the patio doors into the massive dining room where 3 tables had been arranged. The main table, an imposing mahogany masterpiece that seated 20, dominated the center of the room. To its left, a slightly smaller table for the teenagers and young adults. And to the right, decorated with colorful placemats and plastic cups, the children's table. I scanned the main table, looking for my name card among the elegant calligraphy. Aunt Vivian and Uncle Richard at the heads, my mother and her brother beside Aunt Vivian. Cousins with spouses strategically placed according to some family hierarchy. I'd long stopped tracking. No Eliza Reynolds. I checked the young adults table. Cousins in college, recent graduates, a new fiancé being introduced to the family ritual. No Eliza Reynolds. A knot formed in my stomach as I turned toward the children's table. And there it was, nestled between Tommy, age 7, and Zoe, age 5. Eliza R. Not even my full last name. Just Eliza R. "Oh, we had to make some last-minute adjustments," Aunt Vivian said, suddenly beside me, her voice low. "With you RSVPing so late, we had already finalized the seating arrangements at the main table." I stared at the name card, the childish font, the obvious lie. My RSVP had been sent the day after I received the forwarded invitation. "The kids are always so excited to meet new people," she continued, patting my arm. "And you don't know most of the adults well anymore, do you? This way you won't have to struggle through conversations with strangers." Strangers. My family, now classified as strangers. I felt eyes on me from around the room, watching to see how I would react. Would I cause a scene? Storm out? Accept the humiliation quietly? 8 years ago, I might have done any of those things. 8 years ago, I was still seeking their approval, their acceptance. But I wasn't that Eliza anymore. "Of course," I said smoothly, picking up my name card. "I understand completely." Relief washed over Aunt Vivian's face, quickly replaced by confusion as I walked past the children's table toward the main dining table. I approached Uncle Richard's end, where my cousin Sophia sat to his right, the place of honor traditionally given to his favorite. "Sophia," I said pleasantly, "would you mind terribly if I borrowed your pen? I need to make a quick adjustment." Bewildered, she handed me the Mont Blanc she'd been fidgeting with. I uncapped it, crossed out Sophia Westfield on her name card, and wrote Eliza Reynolds in its place. "What do you think you're doing?" Uncle Richard's voice boomed across the now silent dining room. I looked up, meeting his gaze directly. "Correcting an oversight," I said, my voice carrying in the quiet room. "I'm sure Sophia won't mind taking my place with Tommy and Zoe. After all, they're always so excited to meet new people." Sophia stood, her face flushing deep red. "You can't just—" "Eliza," my mother interrupted, her voice strained. "Please don't make a scene." I turned to face her. "A scene? I'm simply taking my rightful place at this table. After all, I am the CEO. Of Reynolds Technologies, surely the CEO of a Fortune 500 company shouldn't be seated with kindergarteners." The silence that followed was absolute. Several relatives shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Others stared openly, shocked by my boldness. My mother looked mortified, Aunt Vivian furious. Uncle Richard's face had turned an alarming shade of purple. I pulled out Sophia's chair, my chair now, and sat down, smoothing my napkin across my lap as if nothing unusual had happened. "This is unacceptable," Uncle Richard sputtered. "In my house—" "Actually," I interrupted, "it's Aunt Vivian's house, isn't it? Since it's in her name for tax purposes? Or has that changed?" His mouth snapped shut. That particular family secret wasn't supposed to be common knowledge. "Eliza," Aunt Vivian began, her voice honeyed with forced patience. "I understand you're upset, but this isn't how we do things in this family. There's a certain order." "Order?" I laughed, the sound genuine for the first time since I'd arrived. "You mean hierarchy." And in case you haven't been paying attention for the past 8 years, that hierarchy has changed. I reached into my bag and removed my phone, pressing a single button before setting it on the table beside my water glass. Within 30 seconds, the doorbell rang. Aunt Vivian frowned, gesturing for the housekeeper to answer it. Heavy footsteps echoed through the house. Then Marcus appeared in the dining room doorway, his 6'4" frame filling the space. His dark suit was impeccably tailored, the subtle bulge of his shoulder holster visible only if you knew to look for it. Behind him stood 2 more members of my security team, equally imposing. "Ms. Reynolds," Marcus said, his deep voice respectful but firm. "Is everything all right?" A collective intake of breath around the table. This wasn't just a bodyguard. This was a statement. "Everything's fine, Marcus," I said calmly. "I was just explaining to my family that I'll be staying for dinner after all." He nodded once, then stepped back to position himself against the wall, his eyes constantly scanning. The room, professional, alert, unmistakably protective. Uncle Richard stared at Marcus, then at me, understanding slowly dawning on his face. Not just a successful businesswoman, a powerful one. Powerful enough to require protection. Before anyone could speak, Marcus stepped forward and leaned down to whisper in my ear. The call came through. The board approved the acquisition. Unanimous vote. It's yours. I kept my expression neutral as he straightened, but inside, a wave of satisfaction washed over me. Perfect timing. "Thank you, Marcus," I said, then addressing the table. "Shall we begin dinner? I'm sure Aunt Vivian has gone to considerable effort, and I'd hate for anything to get cold." Slowly, reluctantly, the family began to take their seats. Sophia, after a poisonous glare in my direction, stomped over to the children's table and sat down, her designer dress absurdly out of place among the booster seats and plastic cups. The housekeeper began serving the first course, a chilled avocado soup that no one seemed particularly interested in anymore. The tension around the table was thick enough to cut with the silver butter knives laid out beside each fine china plate. "So," my cousin Derek finally ventured, clearly attempting to diffuse the situation, "I heard your company is doing well. Some kind of technology thing, right?" 8 years, and that was still the extent of what they knew about my work. Some kind of technology thing. "Yes," I said, tasting the soup. "Some kind of technology thing that's currently valued at just over $4 billion. More silence, more shifting in seats. $4 billion? Uncle Richard repeated, his tone suggesting he thought I was exaggerating. 4.2 after today's acquisition, I corrected. Which reminds me. I turned to Aunt Vivian. I meant to ask you about the house. She blinked, caught off guard by the sudden change in topic. The house? What about it? It's a lovely property, I said, gesturing around us. Excellent. Bones, prime location. I've always admired it. Thank you, she said cautiously. We've put a lot of work into it over the years. I nodded appreciatively. It shows. Which is why I was surprised to see it listed in the distressed properties portfolio that came across my desk this morning. The color drained from Aunt Vivian's face. Uncle Richard's spoon clattered against his bowl. What are you talking about? He demanded. I pulled out my phone again, scrolled briefly, then turned the screen toward them. Westfield Holdings is leveraged quite heavily against this property, isn't it? And according to this, you've missed the last 3 payments to Meridian Bank. Uncle Richard's face went from purple to ashen in seconds. How did you— Those are private financial matters. They were, I agreed, putting my phone away. Until about 40 minutes ago, when Reynolds Technologies acquired Meridian's debt portfolio as part of our expansion into financial services. The implications settled over the table like a heavy fog. I didn't just know about their financial troubles, I now controlled them. You bought our mortgage? Aunt Vivian stammered. Not specifically. I said, dabbing at my lips with the linen napkin. It was part of a package deal. But yes, effectively, I now hold the note on this house. My mother stared at me, her expression a complex mix of horror and something else. Something that might have been pride if I allowed myself to hope for such things. Are you threatening us? Uncle Richard's voice had lost its usual bluster, replaced by something smaller, uncertain. I set down my spoon and looked directly at him. Not at all, Uncle Richard. I'm simply sharing relevant information since we're family. I emphasized the last word, letting its irony hang in the air. And family should know where they stand with each other, don't you think? Before he could answer, Marcus approached again, leaning down to whisper something else in my ear. This time, I allowed a small smile to curve my lips as he spoke. The paperwork is ready whenever you are, Ms. Reynolds. I thanked him with a nod, then turned back to the table of shocked relatives. I apologize for the interruptions. Running a global company means I'm never really off the clock. I lifted my water glass in a small toast. Even at family reunions, Aunt Vivian found her voice first. Eliza, whatever issues you think you have with this family, using your financial position to intimidate us is hardly the way to resolve. Them. Intimidate you. I raised an eyebrow. I'm simply being transparent about a business transaction that happens to affect you. Isn't that preferable to finding out when the bank calls? You've made your point, my mother said quietly. What exactly do you want, Eliza? What did I want? The question hung in the air, heavier than it should have been. 8 years ago, the answer would have been simple. Their approval, their acceptance, their love. 8 years of therapy and success had changed that answer. I want what I've always wanted, I said finally. Acknowledgement of my worth. Not as the little girl you can dismiss or the failure you predicted I would become, but as the woman I am. The woman I made myself into, despite all of you. The silence that followed wasn't shocked or angry. It was thoughtful, perhaps even contemplative. For the first time since I'd entered the house, people were truly looking at me, seeing me. And the house? Uncle Richard asked, his voice uncharacteristically subdued. I shrugged lightly. The house is business, not personal. Reynolds Technologies will honor the original terms of your mortgage. Whether you can meet those terms is entirely up to you. Relief visibly washed over Aunt Vivian's face, followed quickly by confusion. You're not going to foreclose? Would that make you feel better? I asked. If I used my power to hurt you, the way you used yours to hurt me, would that fit your narrative about who I am? No one answered. No one could. The rest of the dinner passed in a strange, subdued atmosphere. The usual family dramas and petty competitions had been overshadowed by my revelation. Conversations were stilted, careful. Everyone seemed to be reassessing, recalculating their position in a family hierarchy that had suddenly, dramatically shifted. As dessert was being served, a panna cotta that jiggled nervously on its plate, much like the relatives around the table, I felt my phone vibrate. A text from Marcus, standing vigilant by the door. Car ready when you are. I waited until everyone had been served, then stood, placing my napkin beside my barely touched dessert. I'm afraid I need to cut the evening short, I announced. Early flight to Tokyo tomorrow for the Asian market launch. Murmurs of understanding rippled around the table, no one quite meeting my eyes except my mother, who stood as well. I'll walk you out, she said. We moved through the house in silence, past the wall of family photos that didn't include me, through the foyer where I'd once stood crying after Uncle Richard's cutting remarks about my scholarship. The weight of those memories felt different, now, less painful, more like artifacts from someone else's life. Outside, my Tesla waited at the end of the driveway, Marcus already holding the door open. My mother paused on the front step, arms crossed protectively over her chest. Was any of that true? She asked. About the mortgage? I turned to face her. Every word. Reynolds Technologies acquired Meridian Bank's debt portfolio this morning. She nodded slowly. And you knew, when you accepted the invitation, that this was happening? I knew it was a possibility, I admitted. The timing was fortunate. For you. For all of us, Mother. Clarity is a gift, even when it's uncomfortable. She looked past me to the security team waiting discreetly by the vehicles, then back to me. When did you become this person, Eliza? This powerful stranger? The question wasn't accusatory, just genuinely bewildered, as if she'd missed some fundamental transformation. I was always this person, I said gently. You just never looked closely enough to see it. Something shifted in her expression. A recognition, perhaps, or the beginning of one. And the children's table? Was that Vivian's idea or Richard's? Does it matter? She considered this, then shook her head. I suppose not. After a pause, she added, Will you come back? For the next family gathering? I studied her face, searching for the motivation behind the question. Was it hope? Obligation? Fear of what I might do to the family financially if excluded again? I don't know, I answered honestly. That depends on whether there's anything worth coming back for. She flinched slightly but nodded. Fair enough. We stood in silence for a moment longer, the weight of unspoken words between us. Then I turned and walked down the steps toward my waiting car. Eliza, she called after me. I paused, looking back over my shoulder. I'm proud of you, she said, the words sounding strange, unpracticed. I should have said that a long time ago. I didn't respond immediately, letting the words settle in the space between us. 8 years I'd waited to hear them. 8 years of building something that couldn't be dismissed or diminished. 8 years of becoming someone they couldn't ignore. Thank you, I said finally. That means something, coming now. It would have meant everything, coming then. I continued to my car, where Marcus held the door open. As I slid into the leather seat, he leaned in. Everything okay, Ms. Reynolds? I looked back at the mansion, at my mother still standing on the steps, at the windows where curious faces quickly ducked out of sight. Yes, Marcus, I said. For the first time in a very long time, I think it is. As we drove away, I didn't look back. There was no need. I wasn't leaving anything behind that I needed anymore. The little girl who had craved their approval had grown into a woman who had transcended it. The table they assigned me no longer mattered because I had built my own, and I was the one who decided who got to sit there. I stood there, staring, at the children's table name card between my fingers, feeling the weight of every eye in the room on me. In that moment, I had a choice: react with the hurt they expected, or respond with the power I'd earned. 8 years ago, I would have quietly taken my seat at the children's table, swallowing my dignity along with whatever kiddie meal they'd prepared. 8 years ago, I was still trying to earn a place in their world, but I wasn't that woman anymore. Of course, I said smoothly, picking up my name card. I understand completely. Relief washed over Aunt Vivian's face, quickly replaced by confusion as I walked past the children's table toward the main dining table. I approached Uncle Richard's end, where my cousin Sophia sat to his right, the place of honor traditionally given to his favorite. Sophia, I said pleasantly, would you mind terribly if I borrowed your pen? I need to make a quick adjustment. Bewildered, she handed me the Mont Blanc she'd been fidgeting with. I uncapped it, crossed out Sophia Westfield on her name card, and wrote Eliza Reynolds in its place. What do you think you're doing? Uncle Richard's voice boomed across the now silent dining room. I looked up, meeting his gaze directly. Correcting an oversight, I said, my voice carrying in the quiet room. I'm sure Sophia won't mind taking my place with Tommy and Zoe. After all, they're always so excited to meet new people. Sophia stood, her face flushing deep red. You can't just— Eliza, my mother interrupted, her voice strained. Please don't make a scene. I turned to face her. A scene? I'm simply taking my rightful place at this table. After all, I am the CEO of Reynolds Technologies. Surely the CEO of a Fortune 500 company shouldn't be seated with kindergartners. The silence that followed was absolute. Several relatives shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Others stared openly, shocked by my boldness. My mother looked mortified, Aunt Vivian furious. Uncle Richard's face had turned an alarming shade of purple. I pulled out Sophia's chair, my chair now, and sat down, smoothing my napkin across my lap as if nothing unusual had happened. This is unacceptable, Uncle Richard sputtered. In my house. Actually, I interrupted, it's Aunt Vivian's house, isn't it? Since it's in her name for tax purposes? Or has that changed? His mouth snapped shut. That particular family secret wasn't supposed to be common knowledge. Eliza, Aunt Vivian began, her voice honeyed with forced patience. I understand you're upset, but this isn't how we do things in this family. There's a certain order. Order? I laughed, the sound genuine for the first time since I'd arrived. You mean hierarchy. And in case you haven't been paying attention, for the past 8 years, that hierarchy has changed. I reached into my bag and removed my phone, pressing a single button before setting it on the table beside my water glass. Within 30 seconds, the doorbell rang. Aunt Vivian frowned, gesturing for the housekeeper to answer it. Heavy footsteps echoed through the house. Then Marcus appeared in the dining room doorway, his 6'4" frame filling the space. His dark suit was impeccably tailored, the subtle bulge of his shoulder holster visible only if you knew to look for it. Behind him stood 2 more members of my security team, equally imposing. Ms. Reynolds, Marcus said, his deep voice respectful but firm. Is everything all right? A collective intake of breath around the table. This wasn't just a bodyguard. This was a statement. Everything's fine, Marcus, I said calmly. I was just explaining to my family that I'll be staying for dinner after all. He nodded once, then stepped back to position himself against the wall, his eyes constantly scanning. The room, professional, alert, unmistakably protective. Uncle Richard stared at Marcus, then at me, understanding slowly dawning on his face. Not just a successful businesswoman, a powerful one, powerful enough to require protection. Before anyone could speak, Marcus stepped forward and leaned down to whisper in my ear. The call came through. The board approved the acquisition. Unanimous vote. It's yours. I kept my expression neutral as he straightened, but inside, a wave of satisfaction washed over me. Perfect timing. Thank you, Marcus, I said. Then, addressing the table, shall we begin dinner? I'm sure Aunt Vivian has gone to considerable effort, and I'd hate for anything to get cold. The dinner that followed was the most exquisitely uncomfortable meal I'd ever attended. The tension hung in the air like smoke, choking casual conversation before it could start. Every clink of silverware against china felt amplified in the strained silence. Uncle Richard drained his scotch faster than usual, while Aunt Vivian picked at her salmon with the concentration of a surgeon. Across the room at the children's table, Sophia sat fuming, her designer dress absurdly out of place among the booster seats and plastic cups. Tommy and Zoe seemed delighted by her presence, peppering her with questions about why a grown-up was sitting with them. Each time she glanced my way, I raised my water glass in a small toast. So, my cousin Derek finally ventured, clearly attempting to diffuse the situation. I heard your company is doing well. Some kind of technology thing, right? 8 years? And that was still the extent of what they knew about my work. Some kind of technology thing. Yes, I said, tasting the soup. Some kind of technology thing that's currently valued at just over $4 billion. More silence, more shifting in seats. 4 billion? Uncle Richard repeated, his tone suggesting he thought I was exaggerating. 4.2 after today's acquisition, I corrected, which reminds me. I turned to Aunt Vivian. I meant to ask you about the house. She blinked, caught off guard by the sudden change in topic. The house? What about it? It's a lovely property, I said, gesturing around us. Excellent bones, prime location. I've always admired it. Thank you, she said cautiously. We've put a lot of work into it over the years. I nodded appreciatively. It shows, which is why I was surprised to see it listed in the distressed properties portfolio that came across my desk this morning. The color drained from Aunt Vivian's face. Uncle Richard's spoon clattered against his bowl. "What are you talking about?" he demanded. I pulled out my phone again, scrolled briefly, then turned the screen toward them. Westfield Holdings is leveraged quite heavily against this property, isn't it? And according to this, you've missed the last 3 payments to Meridian Bank. Uncle Richard's face went from purple to ashen in seconds. How did you— Those are private financial matters. They were, I agreed, putting my phone away. Until about 40 minutes ago, when Reynolds Technologies acquired Meridian's debt portfolio as part of our expansion into financial services. The implications settled over the table like a heavy fog. I didn't just know about their financial troubles, I now controlled them. You bought our mortgage? Aunt Vivian stammered. Not specifically, I said, dabbing at my lips with the linen napkin. It was part of a package deal. But yes, effectively, I now hold the note on this house. My mother stared at me, her expression a complex mix of horror and something else, something that might have been pride if I allowed myself to hope for such things. Are you threatening us? Uncle Richard's voice had lost its usual bluster, replaced by something smaller, uncertain. I set down my spoon and looked directly at him. Not at all, Uncle Richard. I'm simply sharing relevant information since we're family. I emphasized the last word, letting its irony hang in the air. And families should know where they stand with each other, don't you think? The questions came rapid fire after that. How long had I known about their financial troubles? Was I planning to foreclose? What were my intentions? Each query more panicked than the last, as if they'd suddenly realized they were sitting across from someone with real power. Not just the kind that comes from controlling family gatherings and deciding who sits where. I answered each question, calmly, revealing only what I wanted them to know. Yes, I was aware of their financial difficulties. No, I hadn't specifically targeted their mortgage. Yes, I had the legal right to call the loan if I chose to. But why would I do that? I asked, looking around the table. Why would I use my position to hurt people? Even people who've hurt me? What would that say about who I am? The question hung in the air, unanswerable. Because they would have done exactly that. Had our positions been reversed, they would have used power to punish, to exclude, to reinforce the hierarchy they'd created. I'm not like you, I said softly, the words carrying in the silence. I never was. That's what you couldn't forgive. My mother's hand trembled as she reached for her wine glass. Eliza, that's not fair. We always wanted what was best for you. No, I countered. You wanted what was easiest for you. What fit? Your narrative about who I was supposed to be. When I deviated from that script, you cut me out. That's not true, Aunt Vivian protested. You're the one who left. Who didn't come to family events, who was too busy with your business. I turned to her, raising an eyebrow. Really? Should we review the email thread from Christmas 3 years ago? When you told everyone I'd declined the invitation before you'd even sent it to me? She paled slightly. I don't recall. Or perhaps Thanksgiving 5 years ago. I continued. when you seated me at the far end of the table, next to the bathroom door, and acted surprised when I left early. You're exaggerating, Uncle Richard cut in. Every family has its little dramas. You've always been sensitive. I smiled at that. The familiar dismissal, the gaslighting I'd heard all my life. Sensitive, dramatic, difficult. Those were your favorite words for me, weren't they? Your way of dismissing anything I said or felt that didn't conform to your expectations. Marcus stepped forward again, leaning close to whisper another message. This time I didn't try to hide my smile. The transfer just completed, he said. The debt is officially under Reynolds Financial. I thanked him with a nod, then turned back to the table. Now shall we discuss terms? Terms? Uncle Richard's voice cracked slightly. What terms? For your mortgage, I said. It's significantly underwater, you know. The market value of this property is about 60% of what you owe on. Aunt Vivian's hand flew to her throat. 60%? But the appraisal last year was optimistic, I finished for her. The real estate market in this area has corrected significantly since then. Your appraiser was, let's say, generous in his assessment. Another family secret. Their finances weren't just strained, they were on the verge of collapse. What do you want? Uncle Richard asked, his voice flat, defeated. The house? Is that it? Revenge for all the perceived slights? I took a sip of water, letting the question sit for a moment. What did I want? I'd asked myself that question countless times in the weeks leading up to this reunion. Revenge had been on the list, certainly. The chance to watch them squirm, to feel the power shift, to make them understand what it felt like to be at someone else's mercy. But sitting here now, looking at their anxious faces, I realized that revenge wasn't what I'd come for after all. I want you to understand something, I said finally. Success isn't about having power over others. It's about having power over yourself, over your choices, your reactions, your future. I set my glass down deliberately. For years, you made me feel powerless. You decided where I sat, who I talked to, how I was valued in this family. Today, I could do the same to you. I could use my position to hurt you, to exclude you, to make you feel small. I paused, looking around the table at the mixture of fear and confusion on their faces. But I won't, I continued, because I'm not interested in perpetuating that cycle. I'm interested in breaking it. What does that mean exactly? My mother asked cautiously. I turned to her. It means, Mother, that Reynolds Financial will restructure Uncle Richard and Aunt Vivian's loan to make it manageable. We'll adjust the interest rate, extend the term, and forgive a portion of the principal. Aunt Vivian's eyes widened. You'd do that? Under certain conditions, I said. First, a formal apology, not just to me, but to everyone in this family who's been manipulated, excluded, or made to feel less than. Second, family therapy. All of us, together, working to build healthier relationships. Uncle Richard scoffed. Therapy? That's ridiculous. Is it? I asked. More ridiculous than bankrupting yourself to maintain appearances? More ridiculous than treating family members like pawns in some power game? He fell silent, his bluster failing him. And third, I continued, a change in how we operate as a family. No more hierarchies, no more exclusions, no more kids' tables for adults who don't fit your mold. I let my gaze travel around the table, meeting each pair of eyes briefly. Those are my terms. Take them or leave them. The silence that followed was profound. Not the awkward silence of social discomfort, but the weighty silence of people confronting truths they'd spent years avoiding. My cousin Derek was the first to speak. I think it's a fair offer, he said quietly. More than fair. Others murmured agreement, relief coloring their voices. Only Uncle Richard and Aunt Vivian remained silent, the weight of pride battling. with practical necessity. "You have until the end of the month to decide," I said, rising from my seat. "I've taken enough of everyone's evening. Thank you for dinner." I moved toward the door, Marcus falling into step beside me. Before I could leave, however, my mother's voice stopped me. "Eliza," she called. "Wait." I turned, watching as she stood, smoothing her dress with trembling hands. "I accept your terms," she said, her voice stronger than I'd heard it in years. "All of them. And I'll start now, with the apology." She took a deep breath. "I'm sorry. I failed you as a mother. I didn't protect you, defend you, or stand up for you when I should have. I chose peace in the family over justice for my daughter, and I was wrong." Her words hung in the air, unexpected and raw. I hadn't prepared for this, for genuine contrition rather than calculated appeasement. "Thank you," I said softly. "That means something." She nodded, then glanced around the table. "Anyone else?" The challenge in her voice was unmistakable. For the first time in my memory, my mother was taking a stand, not against me, but for me. Slowly, hesitantly, others began to speak. My cousin Derek apologizing for never standing up for me. My Aunt Meredith admitting she'd gone along with the exclusions out of fear of being excluded herself. Even young Ryan, barely an adult, acknowledging that he'd been taught to see me as an outsider. Only Uncle Richard and Aunt Vivian remained, silent, their expressions a mixture of shock and resentment at this rebellion in their carefully ordered kingdom. "I think that's enough for one evening," I said finally. "The rest can wait for our first therapy session." As I walked through the house toward the front door, I felt lighter somehow, as if I'd set down a burden I'd been carrying for years. Not the burden of their opinion, I'd shed that long ago, but the burden of needing to prove myself to them, of needing to show them they'd been wrong. Outside, the night air was cool against my skin. The security team waited by the cars, alert and professional. I paused on the front steps, looking back at the house with its warm lights and cold memories. "Are you okay, Ms. Reynolds?" Marcus asked quietly. I considered the question. Was I okay? Not in the simple, surface way people usually mean when they ask that question, but in the deeper sense, in the bone-deep knowledge of who I was and what I was worth. "Yes," I said. "I think I am." He nodded, then hesitated. "If you don't mind my saying, that was impressive in there." I smiled. "Which part? The corporate takeover or the family therapy mandate?" "The restraint," he said simply. "Most people, given that kind of power over people who hurt them, wouldn't have used it the way you did." The observation caught me off guard. I hadn't thought of my actions as restraint, more as a different kind of power play, a way of maintaining moral high ground while still asserting control. But he was right. I had chosen not to hurt them when I could have. Not out of weakness, but out of strength. Not because I couldn't, but because I chose not to. "Thank you, Marcus," I said. "That means a lot." As we drove away from the estate, I didn't look back. There was no need. The path forward wasn't about them anymore. It never had been. It was about who I chose to be, regardless of how they saw me. The next morning, I woke to a cascade of notifications on my phone. Texts, emails, voice messages, all from family members. Some expressing gratitude for the loan restructuring, others seeking private conversations, separate from the group therapy I'd mandated. A few simply reaching out, as if testing whether the channels of communication had truly reopened. Among them was a message from my mother. "Breakfast? Just the two of us. I know a quiet place." I stared at the text, considering. 8 years of distance. 8 years of hurt and misunderstanding. Could one dinner, one moment of truth, begin to bridge that gap? Maybe not, but it was a start. "I'll pick you up at 9, I replied. The cafe she suggested was a small place near the beach, far from the family estate and the tensions it held. When I arrived, she was already there, sitting at a corner table with 2 cups of coffee. She'd ordered mine black, the way I'd always taken it. A small detail, but one that surprised me. I hadn't expected her to remember. "Thank you for coming," she said as I sat down. "I wasn't sure you would." "Neither was I admitted. We sat in silence for a moment, the morning light streaming through the windows, illuminating the fine lines around her eyes, the silver threading through her dark hair. She looked older than I remembered, more vulnerable. "I've been thinking about what you said," she began, "about using power to hurt people, about perpetuating cycles." I nodded, waiting. "You were right," she continued. "That's exactly what this family has done for generations. Your grandfather did it to your uncle. Richard does it to everyone. And I allowed it to happen to you." She looked down at her coffee cup, turning it slowly between her hands. "I told myself I was protecting you by teaching you to fit in, to go along. But really, I was just afraid. Afraid of standing up to Richard, to Vivian. Afraid of being the one excluded." "I understand fear," I said quietly. "It's taken me years of therapy to overcome the fear they instilled in me. The fear of not being enough, not belonging, not measuring up." She looked up, her eyes bright, with unshed tears. "But you did overcome it. You built something extraordinary. Not just your company, but yourself. Your confidence, your clarity. I admire that so much, Eliza. I always have, even when I couldn't say it." The words washed over me, healing something I hadn't realized was still raw. Why couldn't you say it? Why was it so hard to be proud of me, to defend me? She took a deep breath. "Because you represented everything I'd been too afraid to be. Independent, strong-willed, unwilling to compromise your dreams for others' comfort." She reached across the table, hesitantly touching my hand. "Every time you stood your ground, it highlighted my failure to stand mine. It was easier to join them in criticizing you than to face my own cowardice." The honesty stunned me. I'd expected excuses, justifications, the familiar pattern of making me responsible for their reactions to me, not this raw accountability. "Where do we go from here?" I asked. "I don't know," she admitted. "But I'd like to find out, if you're willing." I studied her face, looking for signs of the manipulation I'd grown so adept at recognizing. But all I saw was exhaustion, regret, and a fragile hope. "I'm willing to try," I said finally. "Not just with you, but with all of them. Not because I need their approval anymore, but because breaking cycles is more important than winning battles." She nodded, understanding. "That's why you're offering to help with the mortgage, not to control them, but to break the pattern." "Exactly," I said. "Control isn't power, it's just fear wearing a crown." She smiled slightly at that. "When did you get so wise?" "Somewhere between being seated at the kids' table and buying the bank that owns the house," I replied, returning. Her smile. We talked for nearly 2 hours, covering ground we'd avoided for years. She told me about her own struggles in the family, the compromises she'd made, the identity she'd sacrificed to maintain peace. I shared stories of building my company, of the mentors who'd believed in me when my family hadn't, of the freedom I'd found in creating something on my own terms. As we prepared to leave, she hesitated, then asked, "Will you come to the next family gathering? Not because you have to, but because you want to?" I considered the question carefully. "I don't know yet. It depends on whether anything actually changes. Real change, not just performances for my benefit." She nodded. "That's fair. More than fair." Outside the cafe, as we prepared to go our separate ways, she paused again. "Eliza, there's something I need to tell you." The seriousness in her tone made me tense slightly. "What is it?" "Your father's been asking about you. He's not well. Heart problems. He won't admit it, but I think he regrets how things ended between you two." I absorbed this information, feeling the complex tangle of emotions it evoked. My father, the silent sentinel who'd watched me leave and never called after me, who'd chosen loyalty to his brother over love for his daughter. "I'll think about it," I said finally. "That's all I can promise right now." She accepted this with a nod. That's all anyone can ask. As I drove back to my hotel, Marcus silent in the passenger seat, I thought about power. Not the kind that comes from controlling others, but the kind that comes from controlling yourself. From choosing how to respond rather than simply reacting. From deciding who you want to be in the face of who others expect you to be. I'd gone to that reunion expecting to find satisfaction in making them see my success, in forcing them to acknowledge what they'd dismissed. Instead, I'd found something more valuable. The realization that I no longer needed their acknowledgement to know my worth. The kids' table wasn't a punishment after all. It was the final test, the last opportunity for them to define me, to put me in my place. And by refusing that definition, by claiming my own place, I'd finally freed myself from their power to define me at all. My phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. "Board meeting in 30 minutes. Video conference set up in your suite." Reality. Calling. The world I'd built, waiting for me to return. "On my way," I replied. I glanced in the rearview mirror, catching my own reflection. I looked different somehow. Clearer, more present. The woman who'd driven to that reunion with knots, in her stomach and armor in place, had been replaced by someone lighter, freer, someone who no longer needed to prove anything to anyone but herself. And that, I realized, was the most powerful position of all. 3 weeks after the infamous family dinner, I stood at the window of my penthouse office, gazing out at the San Francisco skyline. The fog was rolling in, wrapping around the buildings like a protective embrace. 52 floors below, the city pulsed with energy, unaware of the personal revolutions playing out in corner offices and family estates. My phone vibrated on the desk behind me. A text from my mother. "Family therapy starts tomorrow, 10 a.m. at Dr. Winter's. Will you be there?" I'd been asking myself the same question for days. Part of me wanted to skip it, to let them wrestle with their own dysfunction without me as an audience. Another part recognized the opportunity, a chance to break patterns that had shaped not just my life, but generations before me. "I'll be there," I typed back. Marcus knocked on my office door, then entered with a stack of folders. "The due diligence reports on the Meridian portfolio, Ms. Reynolds, and the restructuring proposals for the Westfield property." I smiled at his formality. Even after all these years, all we'd been through, he maintained that professional distance. It was comforting in its consistency. "Thank you, Marcus. Any surprises?" He shook his head. "Nothing significant. The property is underwater as expected, but salvageable with the terms you've proposed." I nodded, taking the folders. "And the security arrangements for tomorrow?" "All set. I'll accompany you personally. 2 additional team members will maintain perimeter awareness. The office has been fully vetted. Dr. Winters comes highly recommended for high-profile family mediation." Of course he'd already researched the therapist. Marcus left nothing to chance. "It's just family therapy, Marcus, not a hostile takeover." He raised an eyebrow slightly. "With respect, Ms. Reynolds, based on what I observed at dinner, the distinction may be academic." I laughed despite myself. "Fair point, but no tactical gear tomorrow, please. We're aiming for healing, not intimidation." "Understood." He hesitated, then added, "May I speak frankly?" "Always." "Are you sure about this approach? These people?" He paused, choosing his words carefully. They've shown they don't value you. They've actively sought to diminish you. Yet you're offering them financial salvation and a chance at reconciliation. I turned back to the window, considering his question. The fog had thickened, obscuring the lower floors of the surrounding buildings. Only the tallest skyscrapers remained visible, their upper stories floating like islands above the mist. It's not about them anymore, I said finally. It's about who I choose to be. I spent years fighting against their narrative, proving I wasn't who they said I was. But in doing that, I was still letting them define me, still dancing to their rhythm, even if I was deliberately stepping on different beats. I turned to face him. This is about writing my own story, and in that story, I'm not someone who uses power to punish or control, even when it's justified. I'm someone who uses it to elevate, to transform. He nodded, his expression thoughtful. That's why you're who you are, Ms. Reynolds, and why they never understood you. After he left, I sat with the folders in my lap, not opening them immediately. Instead, I found myself remembering a conversation with my first mentor, Dr. Elaine Chen, during my second year at MIT. I'd been working through the night on a project, pushing myself to exhaustion, when she found me asleep in the lab. "Why are you doing this to yourself, Eliza?" she'd asked gently. Half asleep, I'd mumbled something about proving myself, about showing everyone who doubted me. "That's the worst reason to excel," she'd said. "Excellence fueled by resentment burns twice as hot, but half as long. Find a better reason, one that fills you rather than drains you." It had taken years to understand what she meant, to recognize that success built on the foundation of "I'll show them" was inherently unstable. True, lasting success had to be built on something more substantial: purpose, vision, values that transcended other people's opinions. That's what tomorrow was about. Not proving my worth to a family that had failed to see it, but living according to the values I'd chosen for myself. The morning of the therapy session dawned clear and bright, the fog having retreated overnight. I dressed with deliberate care, a navy blue suit that conveyed authority without aggression, minimal jewelry, hair pulled back in a simple chignon. Professional but approachable, powerful but not intimidating. Marcus drove me himself, the black SUV gliding through morning traffic with the smoothness of a vehicle that cost more than most people's homes. "Nervous?" he asked, catching my eye in the rearview mirror. "Cautiously optimistic," I replied, which wasn't entirely honest. What I felt was a complex mixture of apprehension, determination, and a strange, unexpected hope. Not hope that my family would suddenly transform into the loving, supportive unit I'd craved as a child. I'd long since abandoned that fantasy. But hope that something might shift, however slightly, in the rigid patterns that had defined us for decades. Dr. Winter's office occupied the top floor of a discreet building in Pacific Heights, its waiting room decorated in soothing neutrals with views of the Golden Gate Bridge in the distance. When we arrived, Marcus took up position near the entrance while I announced myself to the receptionist. "The others are already here," she said with a warm smile. "Dr. Winters will bring you in momentarily." I nodded, taking a seat and picking up a magazine without really seeing it. Through the closed door, I could hear muted voices, my mother's soft alto, Uncle Richard's deeper rumble, the familiar cadence of family, once so comforting, now laden with complexity. The door opened, and Dr. Winters emerged, a tall woman, with silver-streaked dark hair and kind eyes behind stylish glasses. "Ms. Reynolds, please come in." I stood, smoothing my jacket, and followed her into a spacious room with comfortable seating arranged in a circle. Uncle Richard and Aunt Vivian sat side by side on a sofa, their postures rigid with tension. My mother occupied an armchair nearby, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. To my surprise, my father was there too, looking older and more fragile than I remembered. His once imposing frame somehow diminished. "Eliza," he said, his voice rougher than I recalled. "You came." "I said I would," I replied, taking a seat across from him. "Hello, Dad." He nodded, eyes flickering over me with an expression I couldn't quite read. Recognition? Regret? Assessment? Perhaps all three. "Thank you all for being here," Dr. Winters began, taking her own seat. "Before we start, I'd like to establish some ground rules. This is a safe space for honest communication. Everyone will have a chance to speak without interruption. We'll focus on using I statements rather than accusations. And most importantly, we're here to listen and understand, not to defend or justify." She looked around the circle, making eye contact with each of us. "Does that sound reasonable?" To everyone? Murmurs of agreement circled the room. I noticed Uncle Richard's tight jaw, Aunt Vivian's slightly narrowed eyes. They were here under duress, financial duress, specifically, and their resentment was palpable. "Good," Dr. Winters' eye continued. "Eliza, since this session was your initiative, perhaps you'd like to start by sharing what you hope to achieve here?" All eyes turned to me. 8 years ago, this moment would have terrified me. Being the center of attention in a family gathering, expected to express feelings that would likely be dismissed or criticized. But I wasn't that person anymore. "What I hope to achieve," I began, my voice steady, "is understanding. Not just them understanding me, or me understanding them, but all of us understanding the patterns we've created together, the roles we've assigned each other, the stories we've told ourselves about who we are as individuals and as a family." I looked at each of them in turn. For as long as I can remember, I've been cast as the difficult one, the overly sensitive one, the one who didn't fit. And for many years I accepted that role, tried to contort myself to fit into the space I was given. When that failed, I left physically, but I carried that role with me. I defined myself in opposition to it, which is just another form of being defined by it. My mother's eyes glistened with unshed tears. My father studied his hands. "Uncle." Richard stared at a point just above my head, his expression carefully neutral. "I'm not here for apologies, though they might be appropriate," I continued. "I'm here because I believe we have the capacity to create something different, something healthier, something that allows each of us to be fully who we are without diminishing anyone else." "That's very noble," Uncle Richard said, his tone suggesting he found it anything but. "But let's be honest about why we're really here. You've leveraged your financial position to force this intervention." "Richard," Dr. Winters cautioned, "remember our ground rules. Try using I statements." He sighed heavily. "Fine. I feel manipulated by the way Eliza has used her control of our mortgage to compel our participation in this session." "That's fair," I acknowledged. "I did use my position as leverage. Just as you and Aunt Vivian have used your positions as family patriarchs to determine who sits where, who's included, who's valued for decades. The difference is, I'm using my leverage to create space for healing, not to maintain control." Aunt Vivian shifted uncomfortably. "You make it sound so calculated. We never set out to hurt you, Eliza. We simply had certain expectations, certain traditions." "Like seating the CEO of a billion-dollar company at the children's table?" I asked quietly. She flushed. "That was an oversight." "No," my mother interrupted, surprising everyone. "It wasn't an oversight, Vivian. It was deliberate. Let's at least be honest about that." The room fell silent. My mother rarely contradicted her sister-in-law. The family hierarchy didn't allow for such disruptions. "Catherine," Aunt Vivian began, her tone warning. "No," my mother insisted. "If we're going to do this, let's do it properly. We deliberately excluded Eliza. We deliberately diminished her accomplishments. We deliberately punished her for not conforming to our expectations. I participated in that. I allowed it to happen to my own daughter. And I'm ashamed of that. Her words hung in the air, powerful in their rawness. Dr. Winters nodded encouragingly. "Thank you for that honesty, Catherine," she said. "Richard, Vivian, would you like to respond?" Uncle Richard cleared his throat. "I think Catherine is being a bit dramatic. Every family has dynamics, expectations. Eliza chose to reject those expectations. Actions have consequences." "What expectations did I reject exactly?" I asked, leaning forward slightly. "The expectation that I would pursue a suitable career? That I would marry within a certain social circle? That I would prioritize family gatherings over building something meaningful?" "You rejected us," he said flatly. "You made it clear we weren't important to you." "Is that how you saw it?" I asked, genuinely curious. Because from my perspective, I was fighting for a place at the table, literally and figuratively, for years. And being consistently told that place was conditional on me being someone I wasn't. My father spoke for the first time, his voice quieter than I remembered. "You were always different, Eliza. Always questioning, challenging. That's not... It wasn't easy to parent." I looked at him directly. "Different isn't wrong, Dad. It's just different." "I know that now," he said, surprising me. "Seeing what you've built, it's made me reconsider many things." Dr. Winters guided us through the rest of the session with skill, helping us navigate the complex terrain of family history, hurt feelings and entrenched patterns. We didn't reach any dramatic breakthroughs or tearful reconciliations, but something shifted, however slightly. Truth had been spoken aloud, acknowledged if not fully accepted. As the session wrapped up, Dr. Winters suggested we each share one commitment we were willing to make moving forward. "I commit to listening more and assuming less," my mother said. "I commit to acknowledging Eliza's accomplishments," my father added, his eyes meeting mine briefly. Uncle Richard shifted uncomfortably. "I commit to considering other perspectives before making judgments." Aunt Vivian sighed. "I commit to examining our family traditions with a more critical eye." When my turn came, I paused, considering. "I commit to engaging with this family from a place of self-worth rather than seeking external validation, and to using whatever influence I have to create spaces where everyone can be fully themselves." Dr. Winters smiled. "That's an excellent start. We'll meet again next week to build on this foundation." As we filed out of the office, my father hung back, gesturing for me to wait. The others continued to the elevator, leaving us alone in the hallway. "Your mother mentioned you know about my heart," he said without preamble. I nodded. "She said you've been having problems." "Congestive heart failure," he confirmed. "Not immediately life-threatening, but progressive. The prognosis is uncertain." I absorbed this information, searching for the right response. We'd never had an easy relationship, my father and I. He'd been emotionally distant throughout my childhood, present physically but absent in all the ways that mattered most. When I'd left, his silence had been the hardest to bear. "I'm sorry to hear that," I said finally. "Are you getting good care?" He nodded. "The best available. Though not at the level you're probably accustomed to these days." There was no bitterness in his tone, just a simple acknowledgement of reality. The gap between his world and mine had widened into a chasm over the past 8 years. "If you need access to specialists, better treatments," I began. He held up a hand. "That's not why I mentioned it. I don't want your money, Eliza." "What do you want then?" He looked away, down the corridor toward the windows overlooking the city. "Time, I suppose. A chance to, I don't know. Understand, maybe. Before it's too late." The vulnerability in his voice caught me off guard. My father had never admitted to needing anything, certainly not understanding. "I have a dinner meeting tonight," I said. "But I'm free tomorrow evening. We could have dinner. Just the two of us." He looked back at me, surprise evident in his expression. "I'd like that." We arranged the details, the conversation awkward, but not hostile. As we walked toward the elevator together, he cleared his throat. "That bodyguard of yours, Marcus, is it? He's very protective." I smiled slightly. "That's his job." "Is it really necessary? All that security?" The question seemed genuine rather than judgmental. I considered how to answer. When you're a woman in my position, there are risks. Not just physical ones, though those exist. There are people who resent what I represent, what I've built. Marcus and his team create a space where I can focus on my work without constantly looking over my shoulder. He nodded slowly. "I never considered that aspect of your success, the weight of it." The elevator arrived with a soft chime. As we stepped inside, he added, "You've built something remarkable, Eliza. I may not understand all of it, but I recognize the achievement." Coming from him, it was tantamount to a standing ovation. "Thank you," I said simply. The elevator descended, in silence. But it wasn't the strained silence of the past. It was the quietness of two people beginning, however tentatively, to see each other anew. In the lobby, Marcus waited by the entrance, alert as always. My father hesitated, then extended his hand. "Until tomorrow, then." I took it, feeling the papery texture of his skin, the slight tremor that hadn't been there 8 years ago. Until tomorrow. As I walked toward Marcus and the waiting car, I felt lighter somehow. Not because everything was resolved, it wasn't, not by a long shot. But because I'd faced my family as an equal, neither diminished by their judgment, nor defined by their expectations. I'd stepped into that therapy room as fully myself, and I'd left the same way. That evening, in my penthouse apartment, I stood on the balcony watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and crimson. The city stretched before me, lights beginning to twinkle as darkness fell. My phone buzzed with a text from Amara, my closest friend since college. "How did it go with the dragons? Any third-degree burns?" I smiled, typing back, "Surprisingly civil. Might even have made some progress. Miracle worker. Dinner next week to hear all the details? That new place on Valencia?" "It's a date," I replied. Setting down my phone, I thought about the journey that had brought me to this moment. Not just the external journey from a children's table to a penthouse balcony, but the internal one, from a young woman desperate for validation to someone who had learned to validate herself. The real transformation hadn't happened in boardrooms or on the cover of Forbes. It had happened in quiet moments of choice. Choosing to believe in my vision when others dismissed it. Choosing to define success on my own terms. Choosing, finally, to engage with my family from a place of strength rather than need. As the last rays of sunlight disappeared beyond the horizon, I made another choice. I picked up my phone and opened the document I'd been avoiding for weeks, the restructuring proposal for Uncle Richard and Aunt Vivian's mortgage. The terms I'd outlined were fair, but not charitable, giving them a chance to retain their home without creating financial dependency. I approved it with a digital signature, then sent it to legal for processing. Not as a power play or a peace offering, but as a business transaction guided by principles of fairness and respect. The same principles I tried to apply to every aspect of my life now. My phone rang. Marcus, checking in as he did every evening. "All set for tomorrow, Ms. Reynolds. Car will pick you up at 6:30 for dinner with your father." "Thank you, Marcus. Will you be driving?" "Yes, ma'am. With Daniels on advance work." I smiled at his thoroughness. "It's just dinner with my father, Marcus. Not a diplomatic mission." "With respect, Ms. Reynolds, after what I observed at..." The family reunion, I'd say diplomatic mission, is exactly the right description. He wasn't wrong. Tomorrow's dinner would be a delicate negotiation of history and possibility, of old wounds and new beginnings. But unlike the scared, angry young woman who'd left home 8 years ago, I wasn't entering this negotiation from a position of weakness. I'd built something in those 8 years, not just a company, but a self. A core of certainty that couldn't be shaken by anyone's disapproval or diminished by anyone's judgment. That was the real power I'd gained, far more significant than any corporate acquisition or financial leverage. As night settled fully over the city, I went inside and prepared for bed, setting out my clothes for the morning's meetings. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges: the board presentation, the product launch review, dinner with my father. But I would meet each one as myself, not as the person my family had tried to make me, or even as the person I'd become in defiance of them, but simply as Eliza, complete, complex, and comfortable in her own skin. That night I dreamed of tables, not the children's table that had sparked this journey, but a different one. Round rather than rectangular, with no head position, to signify hierarchy. Large enough for everyone to have a place, yet small enough for real connection. In the dream, I wasn't fighting for a seat. I was helping to build the table itself. I woke with the image still clear in my mind and a sense of purpose that transcended old hurts and resentments. Perhaps that was the table we were beginning to build. In that therapy room with its circle of chairs and its invitation to honest communication. Not a family table where places were assigned according to worth, but a human table where each person's inherent value was recognized and respected. A table where no one was relegated to the kids section unless they were, in fact, a child. A table worthy of gathering around. The restaurant my father had chosen for our dinner was a small Italian place in North Beach, tucked away on a side street far from the tourist crowds. When I arrived, Marcus scanned the interior before nodding his approval and taking up position, at a discreet distance outside. My father was already seated at a corner table, his tall frame bent slightly as he studied the menu through reading glasses I'd never seen him wear before. He stood when he saw me, a gesture from another era. "Eliza, thank you for coming." "Of course," I said, accepting the brief, awkward hug he offered. Another first. "I like this place. Very old school." He smiled faintly. "Your mother and I came here on our first anniversary. Before Richard and Vivian, before the family business took over everything." He gestured to the chair across from him. "They still make the best risotto in the city." A waiter appeared with a bottle of wine, already ordered, already opened. Barolo, my father's favorite. Some things hadn't changed. "I hope you don't mind," he said, gesturing to the wine. "I remembered you preferred red." The fact that he remembered anything about my preferences was surprising enough that I simply nodded. "Red is fine. Thank you." The waiter poured, then left us with menus. For a moment, we sat in silence, the awkwardness of 8 years stretching between us like an invisible barrier. How do you begin a conversation after so much silence? What words can bridge such a gap? "Your bodyguard," my father said finally. "He's very thorough." I smiled slightly. "Marcus takes his job seriously." "He's former military? Special?" "Forces," I confirmed. "Retired after 3 tours. He's been with me since the company hit unicorn status, and the security concerns became more significant." My father nodded, sipping his wine. "And are they? Significant, I mean?" I considered how to answer. The truth was complex, a mix of genuine security threats and the performative aspects of power. In Silicon Valley, visible security was as much a status symbol as a practical necessity. But there were real concerns too, especially for a woman in my position. "There have been incidents," I said carefully. "Nothing too alarming, but enough to warrant precautions." He frowned. "What kind of incidents?" "The usual. Aggressive fans, disgruntled former employees, occasional stalkers. Nothing Marcus and his team can't handle. Something flickered across his face. Concern, perhaps, or regret that he was learning about these aspects of my life so late, after they'd already been managed without him. "I see," he said. Then, after a pause, "I've been following your career, you know. Even when we weren't speaking. Your mother keeps a file of every article, every interview." This surprised me. "She does?" He nodded. "Started it when you first got that seed funding. She's got everything. That TechCrunch piece about your Series A, the Forbes 30 Under 30 feature, the Time cover. She brings home every magazine with your face on it." I tried to reconcile this information with the mother I knew, the woman, who had stood by silently while others diminished me, who had suggested I find something more suitable than tech entrepreneurship. "She never said anything," I murmured. "No," he agreed. "Neither of us did. That's on us." The waiter returned, and we ordered. Risotto for him, pasta for me. When he left, my father leaned forward slightly. "I owe you an explanation?" "Eliza. Maybe not even an explanation. There isn't really one that's adequate. But at least an acknowledgement." I waited, giving him space to continue. "I was raised in a certain way," he began, "with certain expectations about family, about roles, about success. My father was not a gentleman. He had very specific ideas about how things should be done, who should lead, who should follow. I absorbed those ideas without really questioning them." He twisted his wine glass slowly. "When you came along, this bright, questioning, stubborn little girl who didn't fit any of the patterns I understood, I didn't know how to respond. I didn't have the tools. So you deferred to Uncle Richard," I said. "Let him set the tone for how I should be treated." He nodded, looking pained. "Richard was successful in ways I never was. He had the business acumen, the social connections. I was just a mid-level accounting manager who married above his station, as your aunt likes to remind everyone." This was a perspective I'd never considered. My father's own insecurities, his position in the family hierarchy. I'd always seen him as complicit in my exclusion, not as another victim of the same dynamics. "That doesn't excuse how I failed you," he continued. "But maybe it helps explain it. I was so busy trying to maintain my own precarious place at the table that I couldn't defend yours." The food arrived, steaming and fragrant. We paused while the waiter grated fresh Parmesan, topped off our wine. When he left, I spoke carefully. "I appreciate the insight, but understanding why someone hurt you doesn't actually make the hurt less real." "No," he agreed. "It doesn't. And I'm not asking for forgiveness, Eliza. I'm not sure I deserve it. I'm just trying to see you, to really see you, maybe for the first time." We ate in silence for a few minutes, the rich flavors a counterpoint to the emotional weight of our conversation. Through the window, I could see Marcus standing alert, scanning the street with practiced efficiency, a physical embodiment of the protection I'd built around myself over the years. "You know," my father said, following my gaze, "watching you at that dinner, the way you handled Richard and Vivian, the way you refused to accept the place they tried to assign you. I was proud, terrified for what it might mean for the family dynamics, but proud." "Terrified?" I asked. He smiled ruefully. "Richard and Vivian have controlled the family narrative for decades. No one challenges them. No one. Until you." "I'm not interested in controlling the narrative," I said. "I'm interested in writing my own story without letting their narrative define me." He nodded slowly. "That's what makes you different. What makes you formidable." Formidable. Not difficult, not oversensitive, not dramatic. Formidable. The shift in language wasn't lost on me. The heart condition, I said, changing the subject. How serious is it? His expression sobered. Serious enough. The doctors are talking about a transplant eventually, but I'm not a priority candidate yet. For now, it's medications, lifestyle changes, regular monitoring. And you're following the protocol? He smiled slightly. Your mother ensures I do. She's become quite the health advocate. No salt, daily walks, all my pills lined up in those little containers with the days of the week. I could picture it. My mother, always organized, applying that same precision to managing his care. It was a side of their relationship I'd never witnessed, a tenderness I hadn't known existed. I'd like to connect you with Dr. Amir Shah, I said. He's the top cardiologist at Stanford. He's developing some promising new approaches to heart failure management. He's also my friend. I funded his research initiative last year. My father looked surprised. That's very generous, Eliza. But I couldn't possibly. It's not charity, I interrupted gently. It's family. Isn't that what family does? Use whatever resources they have to help each other? He fell silent, the irony of my words clearly not lost on him. For years, the family had withheld their resources from me. Emotional support, connections, even basic recognition. Now I was offering mine freely, without the conditions they would have imposed. Thank you, he said finally. I would appreciate that. We finished our meal with lighter conversation, neutral topics like the changing landscape of San Francisco, the unusually warm weather, a new exhibit at the De Young Museum. As the waiter cleared our plates, my father hesitated, then reached into his jacket pocket. I brought something for you, he said, placing a small velvet box on the table. It's not a peace offering exactly. It's something that should have been yours a long time ago. I opened the box carefully. Inside, nestled on dark fabric, was a delicate gold pendant, an oval locket with intricate engravings around its edge. I recognized it immediately. Grandma's locket, I whispered. He nodded. She wanted you to have it, left specific instructions in her will. But when the reading came, you were already gone, not speaking to any of us. Richard suggested, we hold on to it until things settled down. 8 years. They'd kept it from me for 8 years. I lifted the locket from the box, feeling its weight, physical and symbolic, in my palm. Does Uncle Richard know you're giving this to me now? My father met my gaze directly. I don't answer to Richard anymore. This is between you and me. Another shift, subtle but significant. The family dynamics weren't just changing because of my new position of power. They were changing because others were beginning to claim their own. Thank you, I said, fastening the locket around my neck. This means a lot. He nodded, seemingly relieved by my reaction. Your grandmother saw something in you that the rest of us missed. A strength, an independence. She used to say you had North Star energy, that you'd find your own way regardless of what anyone else thought the path should be. The description brought tears to my eyes. I'd been close to my grandmother in a way I'd never been with my parents. She'd been the one person in the family who had encouraged my differences rather than trying to smooth them away. I miss her, I said simply. She would have been extraordinarily proud of you, he replied. Not just of what you've built, but of who you've become. We parted on the sidewalk outside the restaurant, our goodbye less awkward than our greeting had been. Not a full reconciliation, but a beginning, a tentative bridge across years of silence and misunderstanding. I'll have my assistant contact Dr. Shah's office tomorrow, I said. They'll reach out to coordinate with your current doctors. He nodded. Thank you. Then, hesitantly, Would you consider coming to dinner at the house sometime? Just your mother and me. Nothing formal. The invitation surprised me. I'd like that, I said, finding that I meant it. As I dressed, I found myself reaching for the locket again, drawing comfort from its solid presence. My grandmother's voice seemed to echo across time, North Star energy. The idea that I had always possessed an inner compass, that my path didn't need to align with anyone else's expectations to be valid. The therapy session that afternoon was less confrontational than the first had been. Dr. Winters guided us through exercises designed to break old communication patterns, having us literally change seats to see situations from different perspectives, asking us to articulate assumptions we held about each other, encouraging us to identify family myths that no longer served us. The story this family tells itself, Dr. Winters observed, is one of rigid hierarchy, of right ways and wrong ways, of proper places and improper ones. But that story isn't working anymore. It's causing pain, creating distance, preventing authentic connection. Uncle Richard shifted uncomfortably. Every family has structure, rules. It's how society functions. True, Dr. Winters acknowledged. But healthy structures flex and evolve. They accommodate growth and change. They create space for each person to flourish in their own way. And if someone's way of flourishing disrupts the entire system? Aunt Vivian asked, glancing at me. Then perhaps the system needs disruption, Dr. Winters replied calmly. Perhaps it's serving some members at the expense of others. The conversation continued in this vein, challenging deeply held beliefs about family, power, belonging. It wasn't comfortable, but it felt necessary, like lancing a wound to allow healing to begin. As the session wrapped up, Dr. Winters gave us homework to individually write our vision of what a healthy family system would look like, what values it would embody, what behaviors it would encourage and discourage. Dream big, she advised. Don't limit yourselves to what seems possible based on past patterns. Imagine what could be if you were building from scratch. Outside, as we prepared to go our separate ways, my mother approached hesitantly. That locket, she said, noticing it around my neck. Your father gave it to you. I nodded. Last night at dinner. I'm glad, she said. It belongs with you. I told him that years ago, but... She trailed off, the unspoken dynamics hanging between us. But Uncle Richard had other ideas, I finished for her. She nodded, looking pained. I should have pushed harder. On that, and so many other things. Why didn't you? I asked, the question genuine rather than accusatory. She considered this, her expression thoughtful. Fear, I suppose. Fear of conflict, of disapproval, of being cast out. I watched what happened to you when you stood your ground, and I wasn't strong enough to face the same consequences. The admission was startlingly honest. And now? I asked. Now I'm trying to find that strength, she said. Better late than never, I hope. I thought about the years of silence, the missed opportunities, the hurt that couldn't be undone. But I also thought about the possibility ahead, the chance to build something new, something healthier. It's never too late to change the story, I said finally. That's what I'm learning. She smiled, relief evident in her expression. Your father mentioned you might come to dinner sometime. Just the three of us. I'd like that, I confirmed. Maybe next week, after I'm back from Tokyo. Back in my office that evening, I found myself reflecting on the unexpected turns my life had taken. 3 weeks ago, I'd walked into that family, reunion armed for battle, prepared to finally claim the respect I'd been denied. I'd expected the confrontation to be the end of something, a final reckoning before I walked away for good. Instead, it had become the beginning of something I hadn't anticipated, a genuine transformation, not just in how my family saw me, but in how I engaged with them. Not from a place of needing their approval, but from a place of knowing my own, worth and choosing connection anyway. My phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. Car ready when you are, Ms. Reynolds. As I gathered my things to leave, my assistant Zoe appeared in the doorway. Before you go, the Tokyo team sent over the final presentation for approval, and Dr. Shah's office called. They've arranged a consultation with your father next Tuesday. Thank you, Zoe. Anything else? She hesitated. Actually, yes. Your uncle called. Richard, not David. He asked if you had time for a coffee tomorrow before you leave for Tokyo. This was unexpected. Uncle Richard, initiating contact outside of the mandated therapy sessions. Did he say what it was about? No, just that he'd like to speak with you privately. I considered declining. After all, I was under no obligation to make time for the man who had orchestrated my exclusion for years. But curiosity won out. Schedule it, I said. But make it clear I only have 30 minutes. The following morning, I met Uncle Richard at a quiet cafe near my office. He was already seated when I arrived, looking slightly out of place among the tech workers with their laptops and casual attire. His tailored suit and carefully combed silver hair belonged to another era, another world. Eliza, he said, standing as I approached. Thank you for making time. I nodded, taking the seat across from him. You wanted to speak with me? He signaled to the barista, who brought over 2 cups of coffee, apparently already ordered. Black, no sugar, he said, sliding one toward me. That's still how you take it, isn't it? The fact that he remembered such a detail was surprising. Yes, thank you. He sipped his own coffee, cream, 2 sugars as always, then set the cup down deliberately. I'll come straight to the point. I've been thinking about what Dr. Winters said yesterday, about systems that serve some members at the expense of others. I waited, giving him space to continue. For most of my life, I've been the beneficiary of such systems, he said. In business, in the family. I set the rules, defined the roles, determined who had a voice and who didn't. And I did it without questioning whether it was right or fair. This level of self-awareness was unexpected from Uncle Richard, who had always seemed so certain of his own rightness. What changed? I asked. He met my gaze directly. You did. Or rather, what you've accomplished did. It's forced me to confront the possibility that I've been wrong about a great many things. Such as what success looks like, what leadership requires, who deserves a seat at the table. He paused. I've always believed in a certain order, a hierarchy based on tradition and position. But you've created something remarkable, without following any of the rules I considered sacred. I sipped my coffee, considering his words. The rules weren't designed for people like me, Uncle Richard. They were designed to keep power in the hands of people like you. He nodded slowly. Yes, I'm beginning to see that. And I'm beginning to question whether that's the legacy I want to leave. What legacy do you want to leave? I asked, genuinely curious. He seemed caught off guard by the question, as if he hadn't considered it in those terms before. I suppose, one of building rather than restricting, of creating opportunities rather than limiting them. He paused. I've been a humiliate. Instead, you chose to use that power to create possibility. The admission clearly cost him something, a lifetime of certainty being questioned, a worldview being re-examined. I'm not saying I agree with all your methods, he continued. That dinner was difficult. But I respect what you're trying to achieve. Coming from Uncle Richard, this was tantamount to a full surrender. Not because he was ceding power, though that was part of it, but because he was acknowledging the validity of a perspective he'd previously dismissed. Thank you, I said simply. That means something. He nodded, then reached into his jacket pocket and withdrew an envelope. This is for you. It's a copy of the family trust document, the real one, not the version we've allowed the wider family to see. I took the envelope, surprised. Why are you giving me this? Because you should know the truth about the family finances, the inheritance structures, the voting rights. especially now that you're taking a more active role in family matters again. I slipped the envelope into my bag, not opening it immediately. I appreciate the transparency. It's overdue, he acknowledged, and it's only the beginning of what needs to change. We finished our coffee with conversation about more neutral topics: my upcoming Tokyo trip, the changing real estate market in the Bay Area, his granddaughter's college applications. As we prepared to leave, he hesitated, then asked, "That bodyguard? Of yours, is he really necessary for family gatherings? It creates a certain atmosphere." I smiled slightly. "Marcus goes where I go, Uncle Richard. It's non-negotiable." He nodded, accepting this boundary. "I understand. Security is important, especially for someone in your position." As we parted ways on the sidewalk outside, he offered his hand, a formal gesture from a man who had always valued formality. I took it, feeling the significance of the moment. Not reconciliation exactly, but recognition. A new chapter beginning. Back in my car, Marcus eyed me curiously in the rearview mirror. "Productive meeting, Ms. Reynolds?" "Surprisingly so," I replied. "I think we're witnessing the start of a significant shift." Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.